Picture this. It's the summer of 1943. World War II is raging, and the Allies are launching this massive invasion on a remote fog-covered island. The code name? Operation Cottage. And what happened there? Well, it's one of the absolute weirdest and most cautionary tales of the entire war.
All right, let's just start with a few numbers to set the scene. To take back the island of Kiska from Japanese forces, the Allies put together a huge American-Canadian force. We're talking more than 34,000 troops. This wasn't a small operation. It was a full-blown amphibious assault. And during this operation, there were casualties, 313 to be exact. Soldiers were killed, others were wounded, and a naval destroyer was seriously crippled. On paper, it looks like the fight for Kiska was a tough one. Except, here's the kicker. When the Allied troops finally took the island, how many enemy soldiers did they find? 0. Nothing. The Japanese were gone. In fact, they'd been gone for almost 3 weeks before the invasion even started. So how on earth is that possible? That's the huge mystery we're going to unpack today. How does a giant army storm a totally deserted island and somehow suffer hundreds of casualties fighting an enemy that isn't even there? Well, the answer, weirdly enough, doesn't start on Kiska. It starts on another island nearby, just 3 months earlier. To really get the phantom battle of Kiska, you first have to understand the very real and very brutal Battle of Attu. The fight for Attu was horrific. I mean, absolutely brutal. The Japanese defenders, even though they were outnumbered, had this brilliant defensive plan. They didn't even bother defending the beaches. Instead, they pulled back into the island's foggy, rocky highlands, and they just dug in, turning the terrain into a fortress. From up there, they rained down mortar and machine gun fire on the American troops below. But what's really important here isn't just the physical battle, it's the psychological scar it left. Out of 2,650 Japanese soldiers on Attu, all but 29 of them fought to the death, and the battle cost the Allies almost 4,000 casualties. So when the Allied commanders looked over at Kiska, which had an even bigger garrison, they didn't just see another island. They saw a bigger, bloodier version of Attu waiting for them. And that expectation, that certainty, was about to shape every single decision they made. So as the Allies are gearing up for this massive invasion, the island of Kiska itself starts sending out some very strange signals. There were all these little clues popping up that suggested the Allied assumption of another bloodbath might be completely wrong. You know, in the weeks right before the invasion, American pilots flying bombing runs over Kiska started to notice weird things. The anti-aircraft fire, which used to be really intense, was getting weaker and weaker. And what's more, bomb craters and damage to buildings weren't being repaired, which was super unusual for the Japanese forces, who were normally on top of that stuff. And then came the biggest clue of all. On July 28th, the island just went dark. Total radio silence. For a lot of intelligence analysts, the evidence was piling up. It seemed pretty clear. The Japanese had somehow packed up and left the island. But the Allied command? They were completely haunted by the ghost of Attu. They saw things totally differently. To them, the silence wasn't a sign of absence. It was a sign of cunning. They were convinced the Japanese were doing the exact same thing they did on Attu, pulling back into the mountains, hiding, and setting up a deadly silent ambush. Every single piece of evidence that said otherwise was just twisted to fit this one powerful idea. And so, that was it. The invasion was a go. A massive, heavily armed force was now steaming towards a battle that, well, existed only in their own minds. August 15th, the attack begins. Just imagine the scene. Nearly 100 warships are just pounding the coast. Then, tens of thousands of American and Canadian troops storm the beaches, fully braced for the fight of their lives, against an enemy they believed was 10,000 strong and dug in deep. But the Japanese weren't there. The soldiers' real enemies turned out to be the island itself. This dense, freezing fog just rolled in, cutting visibility down to practically zero. The ground was this treacherous, swampy mess. The troops were completely disoriented, totally on edge, pushing deeper into this chilling mist, listening for an enemy that just wasn't there. So this is how people got hurt. It was a perfect storm of chaos. In the terrifying confusion of the fog, Allied units actually mistook each other for the enemy and opened fire. Men were killed by leftover Japanese booby traps and mines. The brutal weather led to frostbite and hypothermia. And then out in the harbor, the destroyer USS Abner Reed hit a mine, killing 71 sailors. By the second day, troops were reaching the supposedly impenetrable Japanese forts and finding them completely empty. It was then that the embarrassing truth just became undeniable. The Japanese were gone. So the question became, how did over 5,000 soldiers just vanish into thin air? And this timeline just lays it all out perfectly. On July 28th, the exact same day the radios went silent, a small Japanese fleet used the cover of thick fog to pull off an absolutely masterful evacuation. In less than an hour, can you believe that? In under 60 minutes, they got over 5,000 men off the island. And for the next 2.5 weeks, the Allies just kept shelling and bombing an empty rock. And get this, in one of the most bizarre twists of the war, on the very day of the evacuation, the U.S. naval patrols might have been distracted by something called the Battle of the Pips. Their warships spent hours firing at phantom contacts on their radar, probably just flocks of birds, while the real enemy fleet slipped right past them, completely undetected. You see, the story of Operation Cottage is so much more than just a military screw-up. It's a really profound lesson in human psychology. It shows how our own expectations can literally create a reality of their own, sometimes with deadly results. The official term for this is perceptual bias. Basically, that brutal experience on Ottu created such a powerful filter in the minds of the Allied commanders that they took every new piece of information, the radio silence, the unrepaired buildings, and forced it to fit their story, instead of stopping to question the story itself. In the end, the Phantom Battle of Kiska teaches us a really important lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one you're expecting to fight. It's the unquestioned assumptions you carry around in your own mind. It's a stark reminder that what we believe we're going to see can be way more powerful than what's actually there.